Hello, this is F. Paul Driscoll, editor-in-chief of Opera News, with another episode of Sightlines. And my guest today is Matthew Shilvock from San Francisco Opera, where he is general director.
That's right.
I have the title correct?
That's right.
Thank you very much for joining us, Matthew. It's a pleasure to see you, albeit via Zoom across the continent, but thank you very much and welcome.
F. Paul, it's wonderful to be with you. Great to be in conversation.
Yes, the last interview that we had was right before you took over or were announced as taking over the job. So it's a while ago.
Wow.
Obviously, you've adjusted very well. So you have a big celebration coming up this season. The company is marking its centennial, 100 years in San Francisco. So you're starting off with the Opera Ball, I believe, on September 9th. And then because you're hiding your ambitions nowhere, you're going to kick off the second night with a world premiere. Tell me about John Adams's Antony and Cleopatra, which is opening on September 10th.
Oh my goodness, yes. No, I mean, it's the most incredible moment to be going into this centennial and to feel all of the excitement, but also all of the weight of responsibility of making sure that we recognize everything that has come before in this company. I mean, just to think about everything that has transpired on this stage and over the course of that 100 years and how we honor that in the most fitting way possible. And very early on in the planning for the centennial, we knew that we wanted to try and bring a new John Adams opera to life. If we think about the composers who have had an impact on this stage, I mean, John is right up there at the top of the list. I mean, we have been part of 4 commissions of John's pieces. This will be the 3rd of the world premieres of his pieces that we have done on this stage. And of course, he lives right here. He lives across the bay in Berkeley, and is just a towering figure of this community, but also of the world community of opera. And so I was thrilled when John said yes, and it transpired that we started talking about this back in 2017, actually just before we opened Girls of the Golden West, his prior opera. And it turned out he had been reading the entire works of Shakespeare that year just for fun. And so he had immersed himself in all of the Shakespearean plays. And actually in Girls of the Golden West, there were 2 Shakespeare soliloquies. And I was just blown away by how immediate they were in his text setting. And so when he suggested the idea of a Shakespearean opera and then honed in on Antony and Cleopatra, it just felt all of the energy just came together in the right way. So, and I have to say, one of the real silver linings of the pandemic and one of the sort of creative high points for me has been getting to go over to Berkeley and hearing John play through the scenes as they have unfolded. Because I mean, he has just had this period of years to write this and to sort of to write it in this sort of creative wave over the last couple of years. And so it's just been incredibly affirming to just go and hear it come to life as we've gone through the last couple of years. And I just can't wait to raise the curtain on that as part of our centennial opening weekend.
And when did Elkanah Pulitzer become involved? She's contributed to the libretto, I believe, but she's the stage director. We have a piece on her in our September or October issue, I forget which, I think it's September.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, Elkanah has known John for a while because they've done a couple of projects together, including the semi-stage Nixon in China down at the LA Phil.
Yeah.
And Elkanah and John just, I think, have a very natural and trusting relationship together. And as we began to sort of delve into this play, and this is a monster play. I mean, I think there's over 50 scenes, there's more than 50 characters in it. We knew there was going to have to be a lot of condensing of the play down. And so Elkanah, when she came on board as director and also as sort of libretto consultant, and then our dramaturg, Lucia Schechner, they just began working with John. And I was just with John recently, and we were looking at photos of those early days when, you know, his kitchen table was just covered, and they literally sort of printed out the entire play and sort of went through and sort of started marking off like which characters were critical, which scenes were critical, how to potentially combine scenes. I think there are 3 huge battle scenes in Antony and Cleopatra, and we've condensed those down into one. So John and Elkanah and Lucia really put a huge amount of work in up front to get the structure right. And I think that's, I'm really impressed by how tight it is, but you still feel the epicness of it, but also the intimacy of it.
So if this isn't an indelicate question, but from what you know and have heard of the opera, what is the one piece of it that you think will be most exciting for audiences? Is there one particular moment that you want people to listen for?
Can I have a couple?
Yes.
There are a couple of passages of just quintessential John with just all of that surging energy. There's the opening of scene 2 when we first see Caesar in Rome, because we kind of move from Rome to Egypt and back and forth. And so that first scene where we see Caesar is just incredibly full of surging energy. And actually there's a new scene that John has just written, which is part of a newsreel footage, which is sort of similar in intensity. But then the beginning of the 5th scene of Act 1, the final scene of Act 1, is the Battle of Actium. And it's just the most expansive music imaginable, very reminiscent in many ways of the opening of Rheingold, just sort of the brass building up layer by layer, and you just feel sort of the sunrise rising over the battlefield. So it's a piece of amazing diversity, I think, in the writing as John takes us through again, sort of the epicness of it, but also the individual characterization of it. And I think a lot about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, just in terms of that sort of red hot passion between 2 characters and sort of seeing that, you know, just the energy firing between Antony and Cleopatra.
Another interesting way that you've put the company's history into the centennial season is you're doing Dialogues of the Carmelites and Frau von Schatten. Both pieces received their U.S. stage premieres at San Francisco. Talk about how you reached that decision with all of the pieces that had U.S. stage premieres in your company. How did you choose those 2?
That's a great question. I mean, I early on, there was the big question about how do you honor the past of the company through the repertoire of a season. And I think there are different ways into that. You could recreate part of the first season. You could recreate iconic productions. But I think because I think the fundamental goal of the centennial, I think, is while honoring what has gone before, it's really the stepping off point into what comes next. And so the celebrating the vanguard nature of the company, celebrating a company that through its history has taken on some very important American premieres, as well as creating world premieres, became, I think, a very natural lens that bridged both the history and then the forward-looking innovation of the company. And as we looked at the pieces that we have premiered, we realized that, I mean, these are 2 towering works of the 20th century that have not been on our stage in over 30 years. And you know, Carmelites came to us very quickly after the La Scala world premiere in '57. It was here later that year, which I think is just amazing. You look back sort of how quickly an opera could move, you know, across. We weren't one of the co-commissioners, but how quickly it came over to San Francisco. Whereas Frau von Schatten was a 40-year gap that was composed in 1919, and I think it was only in 1959 when Adler had the you know, tenacity to actually stage this, you know, hugely complex work that it finally came to America. But that was, I think, the impetus was works that honored the history, but in a way that showed the forward-looking nature of the company. So I'm thrilled that both are coming back.
So talk about the new work that you have coming up, not right away, but a little bit later in June, the new opera by Gabriela Lena Frank and Nilo Cruz, which is another new piece, two new pieces for you, brand new pieces for you in the season. This is going to have a production beforehand, but tell me about that and how that came to San Francisco.
Well, first of all, I'm just so proud that we are bookending the season with two Bay Area composers. Gabriela was born in Berkeley. Now she lives up in a very small hamlet called Boonville, which is on the way to Mendocino up on the coast, about 3 hours north of San Francisco. And I have just loved getting to know Gabriela because not only is she an extraordinary composer, and a very evocative composer, but she has this very strong desire to connect music with community, and particularly with rural community. And so she has set up in Boonville an academy for composers and instrumentalists. And a very big part of that is how they intersect with the small communities in the Anderson Valley region up there. So I had been talking to Gabriela for a while, and I think pre-pandemic, the timing hadn't worked out for us to join Frida and Diego. But as we went through the pandemic and we're looking for the final piece of the centennial season, as all of the jigsaw pieces were moving around across the country, it finally became possible for us to be a part of that commissioning group for Frida and Diego. And it's an amazing story of a sort of metaphysical take on these two great artists, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And it's actually an Orpheus-like tale of their relationship together. And very, very briefly, when the opera begins, Frida Kahlo has been dead for 3 years, and Diego Rivera, he doesn't know it, but he's about to die. And he is in a Day of the Dead celebration, and he is trying to invoke Frida Kahlo's memory and trying to sort of reconnect with her. And Katrina, who is the gatekeeper of the underworld, tries to persuade Frida Kahlo to come back to Diego Rivera, but she's not interested. She is, her life is, things are going quite well in the underworld for her. She does not want to be reminded of the pain, both of the relationship, but also the physical pain that she endured. But finally, she does agree to come back, and they have 24 hours together. They're not allowed to touch, although they do eventually touch. And they sort of relive their life through their artwork. And it's just come together beautifully through both the music, the libretto with Nilo Cruz, and then the physical design. Lorena Maza, the director, and her design team. Lorena has a wonderful connection actually to Diego Rivera. She grew up as very good friends with his grandson. So she has a lot of connectivity there. And then I love the connection to San Francisco. I mean, there are 3 great Diego Rivera murals here in the city. And then a fact that I didn't know until we got into this piece, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera divorced briefly. They got remarried, I think about a year later, and they got remarried at San Francisco City Hall while they were in the city. So I love this idea that they would like finish their wedding, walk down the steps of City Hall, and presumably be looking at the opera house in which their story was going to be.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I love that connection. But no, I mean, it's been a joy for us to join San Diego Opera in this, and I'm really grateful to David Bennett there for welcoming us into this as a partner. San Diego will do it in October, and they just did a workshop earlier this year with full orchestra and chorus, and it was just really beautiful to see how that was coming together down there. So I think it's a really nice arc that the season is. Begins with John Adams, ends with Gabriela Lena Frank. Again, both just musical geniuses of the Bay Area.
I have a couple of other specific questions to ask you about San Francisco. One is, explain the Dolby Family Opera for the Bay program, which is on your website, but it sounds quite exciting. What is that?
Well, this is very recently launched, and one of the big goals, I think, of the centennial season is to really build the trust of the community, the broad community, that this opera house is a place where stories of meaning are told, where stories of meaning for many people, for many communities are happening on this stage, and that people feel comfortable coming into this building and feeling like their stories are being told on stage in a way that feels welcoming for them. And so we know from survey upon survey that the barrier of price is a very real one for opera. And so working with the Dolby family, who are wonderful partners with us in everything we do, they really wanted to make a big statement about the openness of the company at our 100th year. And so they are underwriting a program in which for every single performance, we will have 100 premium tickets available at $10 each for residents of the Bay Area who have not been to the opera in the last 3 years. So we're really looking to welcome people who aren't regular opera goers, who may not be thinking about this company as a place where they can experience that kind of storytelling. But again, really committing to doing that for every single performance. This is not just something for a Wednesday night Carmelites, we know we'll have capacity for, but even the opening night opera ball of the season will have those 100 tickets available. There's no blackout dates at all. And so I'm just really excited for that, because again, we hope to just build this sense of trust, of familiarity, of welcomingness. And each opera, the tickets will become available a month before the production begins. And so we have those dates on our website, and people can go and check out those and again, to register for those a month out. And I'm excited to see what we learn from that, and hopefully make a lot of new friends in the process.
Another program I wanted to ask you about is Instigators. What exactly is that?
Well, this is all, again, so I think there's two tent poles that we aspire to in the centennial and going forward. I mean, again, the centennial is just the first chapter of our second century. One is excellence, and continuing the excellence of the company and our music making. Of course, we have Unsung Kim now as our music director, and she is just really elevating excellence in this company in so many extraordinary ways. And then innovation as the second of our main pillars. And we've talked about that already with honoring the vanguard nature of the company in our programming. But as we think about innovation, one of the things that I think came to realize is, as a company with the kind of artistic resources, the kind of technical resources we have, how can we really be on the front edge of research and development for what opera looks like going into the future? And we've gone through a number of different programs over the course of the years here. And I think one of the things we realize is the minute you put a performance at the end of a program, you begin to lock in the definition of what kind of experimentation you can do. The minute you are saying, we're going to do a production in a particular space, even if it's a different space, you begin to sort of narrow the lens of experimentation that you can do. So with the Instigators, we really wanted to just throw open the doors and remove any barriers, remove any preconceived notion of what innovation might look like. And in doing this, I think we also want to sort of honor the spirit of entrepreneurship of the Bay Area, the kind of real R&D labs like Google X, and these sort of places where the impossible becomes possible. And so we've welcomed in 6 instigators who have nothing to do with opera. They are curious. They are often multidisciplinary. They are working on the sort of edges of their own artistic and creative ventures. So they're people who are boundary pushers, and they're curious about what we're doing. There's a mutual curiosity. And so we've welcomed them into the company, and we're trying to avoid for as long as possible defining what the end point is. And that's kind of an uncomfortable place for an opera company that, we exist knowing exactly what we're doing 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. But we're really trying to keep the funnel of curiosity, the funnel of possibility open for as long as possible. And we have an architect, we have a very prominent podcaster and radio host. We have a virtual reality sort of / theater person who she does a lot of work at the intersection of reality and virtual reality. We have a roboticist, someone who specializes in sort of more mechanical engineering. We have a chef, and we have a playwright who thinks a lot about the intersection of theater and social justice. And we had this group come together just a few weeks ago when we launched the program, and just to feel the synapses firing between the instigators themselves, and then between us as a company and between them. And it just began to sort of show what I think we're hoping for in the program is that there is just a sort of honoring of creativity for creativity's sake, and saying that the artwork of the future, the nature of where opera can go, artists need to be leading that. Artists need to be in the driving seat for that. And that's, I think, very much what we're hoping for with the instigators. And the hope is that every year, every 2 years, we bring in new instigators and just continue to sort of to build, to refresh, to bring in new thinking, new ideas. And each instigator will develop what we're calling a path of inquiry. They will develop something that they are working towards with us as a company. So it's not that we won't get to endpoints, but we want to just make sure that they are free to explore using the resources and creativity of our company, and then the wisdom and the expertise and curiosity that they bring. So it's an exciting program. I'm not sure where it's heading, but that's kind of the point.
Obviously, all of us have dealt with the pandemic over the past couple of years, and for arts presenters, it's been particularly worrying because we wonder whether or not the audience will come back at the same force they did before. But
right.
The other issues that we've been facing have been, as you touched on, social justice, especially within the United States. Can you talk a little bit about how that looks in San Francisco? Because this is a city which has been identified as being at the forefront of social justice in certain movements. Mm-hmm. How does that come back to the opera company? Is it something that you've had to re-examine over the past 2 years?
Yes, but I would say going back even before that, in the summer of 2019, we brought on Charles Chip McNeil as our first director of diversity, equity, and community, and charged with many of the goals of, again, I come back to trust and building trust within our community and within our company about how we create art, how we become a place where people, whether artists or audience members, feel that they can be their most vulnerable selves. Actually, through the pandemic, I've thought a lot about vulnerability in opera, and we are an art form that needs vulnerability. We go to very vulnerable places, and we work best as an art form where there is that trust that allows vulnerability, when you can feel like you can have a completely cathartic, raw experience sitting next to a complete stranger. And I think as we established that Department of Diversity, Equity, and Community, a big aspiration of that was to ensure that people around the Bay Area, from whatever community they were, could come to this building and have that kind of experience. And we knew that that was not the case. We knew that while opera goers tell us we're a very welcoming company, people who are not coming to the opera have the exact opposite opinion of us. Mm-hmm. And from the beginning, Chip and his team have just been doing really deep, really profound work, and very sort of very measured work to make sure that we as a company are thinking equitably in a very sustainable and a very authentic way. And as we went through the pandemic, that actually deepened. We now have monthly. They're still on Zoom, but we have monthly gatherings, which we call holding space sessions, where anyone in the company can join those, and we have very, very vulnerable conversations on a variety of issues. And it's actually brought the company together internally in a really deep way as well. I mean, it's very easy to become siloed in a big company, and everyone's focused on their piece of the puzzle. But actually, those holding space sessions created a lot of connectivity as we as we sort of work through a lot of these issues together in a very open way. We've also now, we're in the middle of a process with an organization called Accordant, who is, again, in a very systematic way, helping us understand where we are as a company and where we want to be heading as a company in terms of our equity work. And we've just completed a huge survey, a huge company-wide survey with the board, artists, crew, staff, everybody participating. And we're just now getting the data from that, which is helping us understand how everyone in the company sees the company. You know, we can have our own opinions as sort of leaders of the company about where we are, but what does the company actually think of itself? And from that, we then begin to map out where we're heading. So I would say we're taking a very committed, but also a very thoughtful pathway, because we know that if, as the change that needs to happen happens, it has to be authentically felt. It has to be, you know, deeply rooted in the consciousness and the culture of the company. So, I'm really grateful to Chip for what he's doing to lead that work, and for all the work that the company is doing, because we're really asking the company as a whole to be involved in that work.
Looking at opera as an art form, rather than a business necessarily, what do you think the biggest misconception is about opera on behalf of, in the minds of the public?
I would say, and I think we have culpability for this as an art form, is that people perceive it as an intellectual art form. I think, and again, I think we have some responsibility for that, not necessarily intentional, but I think particularly through the 20th century, this idea that to enjoy and to experience this art form, you have to have a body of knowledge, and an expectation of that the enjoyment of opera comes with the attendant knowledge of the story, the characters, the voice types, who sang what where in 1952. There's a huge level of, I think, fear that comes in the opera world. And to be honest, I feel that, you know, sometimes talking to people, you know, am I saying the right thing? Am I remembering the right thing? There's sort of this overlay of sort of intellectualism, which is fabulous. I mean, I have a musicology degree. I love that side of it. But it's not a prerequisite, and it shouldn't be a prerequisite, because to me, opera is actually the most emotional of the art forms. It's an art form that works on immediacy. And it's interesting, we're doing one of the new productions we're doing is a new Traviata this fall. It's the first new Traviata we've done in 35 years. And I talk a lot about that moment in Pretty Woman where Julia Roberts is sitting. It's supposed to be in San Francisco Opera. It was filmed just after the earthquake in '89, so they had to do it in a soundstage in the end. But she's sitting in what's supposed to be Box Z in San Francisco Opera, watching La Traviata playing out beneath her. And of course, it's her story. It's her story of a courtesan making her way in the world and dealing with the emotional choices that she is making. And she's in tears watching this story, someone who's never been to the opera before, and having an incredibly emotional reaction. And to me, that is a perfect encapsulation of what we do. If we're doing our job right as storytellers on stage, we should be making that emotional connection with great immediacy. And so I think, to me, that's the thing I would love to change in the public perception of opera, is that we are a completely emotional art form. That's the currency in which we deal. Yes, you can go to the nth degree in terms of knowledge about it. And I think a lot about that with wine as well. And I think wine has done a slightly better job of that. You know, you can enjoy a glass of, you know, beautiful red wine without knowing anything about it, or you can go to become a master sommelier and learn everything about it. And so I would like, you know, for opera to have that same kind of duality, that there is just the acceptance that you can just enjoy it, and be there in the moment, be there in the immediacy of it.
Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful, and that's unfortunately what we've got time for. But thank you very much, Matthew Shilvock from San Francisco Opera. I wish you all success with the centennial season, which sounds very exciting, beginning with the Opera Ball on September 9th, and then continuing on stage on September 10th with the world premiere of John Adams' Antony and Cleopatra. And congratulations for making it to this point. It's very, very exciting. You should be very proud. This is F. Paul Driscoll for Opera News Sightlines. Thank you for joining us.